it's a very closely argued case because on the Trump side, they say he's never been convicted or even charged with insurrection. So that doesn't
Yeah.
meet the test in the Constitution of having engaged in insurrection. Of course, on the other side, they argue that it's plain as a pikestaff that he was behind the mob riots on January the 6th. And hundreds of people have been convicted in that case of various charges, including a couple with the charge of insurrection. So it's going to be very closely argued.
At this point, every Thursday, we cross the Atlantic to find out what's happening in Washington. No Matador this week, so we're joined by the Times' US editor, David Charter. David, how are you?
Good morning. I'm good. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just back from a trip to Pennsylvania, reporting trip, and now I'm back in Washington.
What was going on in Pennsylvania?
We were looking at, it's a very big swing state. We were looking at whether all of Biden's big spending on infrastructure was swaying the voters to stick behind him so he can hold that very important state.
And what was your conclusion?
It's not swaying them very much at the moment. They're much more worked up about the cost of living and the price of food in the supermarket, that sort of thing, than they are about building a new bridge.
I know it's one of those things, infrastructure. It's a bit like apprenticeships. It's one of those things where it's probably a good idea to do them for the long-term great good of places, and the economy is already quite good. But I just don't think it's ever going to fire someone up, like you said. But
Biden's he's just going to realise the hard way that you just don't get credit for it, really.
Yeah.
And certainly not within a few months of ordering the building of a new bridge or whatever. So, yeah.
As you know, we see it in British politics as well, that no amount of promises of bypasses or roundabouts. It might be a good thing to do in and of itself, but it's not going to necessarily shift the dial. Let's talk about the Supreme Court, David. Here in the case, remind us which case this is when it comes to whether or not against involving Donald Trump.
This is the case that arises from Colorado, where the Supreme Court of Colorado agreed with a move to ban Donald Trump from the ballot paper. Because he engaged in insurrection, and that refers to the January the 6th riot, of course, at the US Capitol when his supporters stormed in as the 2020 election was being confirmed. So this has gone up to the Supreme Court for an urgent hearing today. We won't get a result, but the 9 justices will hear arguments on both sides of the case for whether Trump is disqualified from running for president later this year, because of the 3rd section of the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, which says that any officer of the United States who took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States but engaged in insurrection or rebellion should be excluded from the ballot. So they've got to decide that.
So in terms of the many cases that Donald Trump is facing right now, is this the biggest one which might actually decide whether or not he can run for president?
In a way, it is, because if he's convicted in any criminal case, he can still run.
Yeah,
you can run for president from jail in America. There's no constitutional bar on a convict running for president. So in a way, this really is enormous, because several states are also considering following Colorado and have got to quite a high level in the court systems there, and they're waiting for the Supreme Court to make its assessment of whether Colorado was right. It was a split decision in Colorado, 4-3. The judges were split, so it's a very closely argued case, because on the Trump side, they say he's never been convicted or even charged with insurrection. So that doesn't meet the test in the Constitution of having engaged in insurrection. Of course, on the other side, they argue that it's plain as a pikestaff that he was behind the mob riots on January the 6th. And hundreds of people have been convicted in that case of various charges, including a couple with the charge of insurrection. So it's going to be very closely argued, I think. But at the end of the day, if you wanted my view, I think the Supreme Court, which leans to the right, of course, with 3 appointees from Trump, not that should influence things, I think that it will probably not bar him from the ballot and say that it's in America, we
Yeah.
let the voters have the final say.
And in terms of his other part, the other obstacle, if that's not quite the right word, to getting on the ballot is getting the Republican nomination. Nikki Haley ploughing on despite coming behind none of the above in Nevada.
That's right. So the third state contest in the Republican primary was on Tuesday, and Haley lost actually by 2-1 to none of these candidates because she was the only candidate in the primary, and that's because the state also, the Republican Party in Nevada also runs a caucus. This is a long historical dispute between the Republican Party, which likes its tradition of a caucus, and is having it tonight, in fact, and the state authorities, which wanted to modernize and have a primary, which Haley said she would only take part in the primary, and Donald Trump said, I'm only going to take part in the caucus. So we've got this bizarre situation in this state. We've got two different events. The Republican Party gives out its delegates to the person who wins the caucus. It's going to be Donald Trump. It was a futile exercise, rather shambolic, mostly being ignored by America, I think, because the state couldn't get its act together. But it was another blow, really, for Haley's case to be the Republican nominee. People are scratching their heads saying, why is she still running? Why is she still carrying on when she's lost 3 times now? She's probably going to go to the next state, South Carolina. It's her home state, and get beaten there. But it does seem at the moment that there's a lot of money still behind her. So it's more of a symbolic campaign, really, that she can say, for example, if Donald Trump loses in November, she can say, I stayed in as long as I possibly could. I gave you every opportunity to vote for the alternative who would beat Biden, and you didn't. So back me in 2028.
Wow. David Charter, thank you for that. We'll see how she keeps on plugging on. David Charter, The Times' US editor.